It was close to midnight when the wind began to sound like whispers against my window. The old clock above the sink ticked so loudly that I could feel every second crawling through the silence of my apartment. I'd been awake for hours, tracing the same lines of an unfinished poem on the page before me. Words about loneliness. About people who live in quiet corners, seen but never really known. That night, I felt more invisible than ever. The heater had gone out again, and the air felt sharp, biting right through my sweater. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, the kind that promised calm but rarely delivered. As I held the warm mug, the rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the thin window pane like a set of restless fingers. And that's when I heard it. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze. My heart started racing before my mind even caught up. Who could possibly be here? No one ever visited me, especially not at this hour. I quickly turned off the small lamp beside my desk, half convinced I might just disappear into the shadows if I stayed quiet enough. But the knocking came again, firmer this time. I took a deep breath. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to make my voice sound braver than I felt. A deep voice answered, muffled by the door. "It's Ethan, the security guard. Sorry for the late hour." "Ethan?" I hesitated. I knew him, at least in the way tenants know the people who patrol the hallways. I'd seen him a few times, a tall man with quiet eyes and a kind smile that never lingered for too long. He always just nodded politely, then went about his rounds. Why was he here now, at my door? I opened it just a crack, enough to see his face under the dim hallway light. The rain had soaked through his jacket, leaving dark stains across his shoulders. His hair clung to his forehead, and his breath came out in short puffs of mist in the cold air. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave an apologetic smile. "I saw your lights flickering from the security monitor. Thought there might be a short circuit. I didn't mean to scare you." "Oh," I said, glancing back at the lamp. "It's just old wiring. The building's been like this for years." He nodded but didn't leave. Instead, his gaze lingered, not in a prying way, more like he was searching for something behind my words. Then he asked quietly, "Are you sure you're all right? You look shaken." I realized I was still clutching my teacup like a shield. My knuckles were probably white. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just not used to visitors." He shifted on his feet, as if debating whether to stay or go. Then, with a soft laugh that felt unexpectedly warm in the cold hallway, he said, "Didn't mean to intrude. I just figured, with the storm and all, maybe it's better not to be alone." Something in his tone, in that simple observation, broke through the barrier I didn't even know I'd built so high. Without thinking, I stepped aside. "You can come in if you want. It's warmer inside." He hesitated for only a second before stepping through the doorway, closing it gently behind him. The small space suddenly felt even smaller, the air thick with an awkward politeness. He wiped his hands on his jacket, trying not to drip water onto the floor. "Sorry," he murmured. "I didn't plan on making a puddle in your living room." "It's fine," I said, finding a small smile. "The carpet's already seen worse." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The storm outside grew louder, filling the silence we couldn't yet fill ourselves. He looked around the room. Bare walls, a small desk cluttered with notebooks, an untouched plant by the window. There was nothing remarkable to see, but his eyes lingered as if he was trying to understand the story behind the stillness. "Do you write?" he asked, nodding toward the open journal on my desk. "Sometimes," I said cautiously. "Mostly just to think." He surprised me by picking up a spare chair and turning it around, sitting with an ease that made the space feel less tense. "I used to write," he said. "Letters I never sent. I guess we all talk to the page when no one else listens." His words caught me completely off guard. I wasn't used to people who understood silence so well. Usually, small talk was the safest form of distance, but there was something about his presence, steady, calm, that made me want to lower my guard, just a little. We talked for a while, about unimportant things at first. The broken elevator, the coffee machine in the lobby that never worked, The strange neighbor in 2B who sang at dawn. Slowly, without either of us steering it, the conversation drifted deeper. He told me about his daughter, a teenager who lived with his ex-wife in another state. He talked about working nights to send her money for school, and how the quiet in these buildings sometimes echoed too much when you were missing someone. I just listened, feeling the weight behind his words, the love and the longing. When he turned the question toward me, "What about you? Family?" I hesitated. The truth felt fragile, like a glass figurine. "Not really," I said, my voice soft. "We don't talk much." He didn't push for more. He just nodded slowly, his eyes kind, as if he knew exactly what it meant to be cut off from the places that were once supposed to hold you. The rain softened after a while, tapering to a faint drizzle. I noticed his hands, rough and steady, wrapped around the mug I'd handed him earlier. He looked at me thoughtfully, then said, "You remind me of the kind of person who carries too much alone." I let out a short, nervous laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who does the same," he replied. There was no judgment in his voice, only a quiet, shared understanding. For the first time that night, the room didn't feel so cold anymore. When he finally stood to leave, it was already past 1 in the morning. He placed the empty mug on the counter and reached for the door, pausing just before opening it. "If the lights keep flickering, let me know," he said, then added with a slight smile. "Or even if they don't." I didn't answer right away. I just watched as he disappeared down the hall, his footsteps fading into the gentle hum of the rain. The door clicked shut, but the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't empty anymore. I sat back at my desk, staring at the half-written poem. The words about loneliness seemed to mean something new now. There was a warmth in them. Unfamiliar, but welcome. I picked up my pen and wrote one last line before setting it down. "Sometimes, the world knocks softly, just to see if you'll answer. They say loneliness is quiet, but mine was never silent. It spoke in echoes. Voices from my past that refused to fade. Whispers of moments I wished had turned out differently. That night, after Ethan left, I sat awake until dawn, staring at my ceiling, wondering how my life had narrowed into this single, dimly lit apartment. His kindness had stirred something I thought I'd buried years ago, the memory of who I used to be, before the world decided I was too complicated to understand. I was born in a small town in Kansas, the kind of place where people believe in two things: what they can see and what they can name. I was neither simple to see nor easy to name. My parents had waited years for a child, and when I arrived, the doctors called me a special case. They used words like ambiguous and inconclusive, medical terms that just felt like shame. My mother cried quietly in her hospital bed, while my father avoided looking at me altogether. I grew up believing my own existence was a secret. My parents told me to never discuss my difference with anyone. They said it was for my protection, but it felt like erasure. School was worse. Children can sense what adults pretend not to see. I wasn't like the boys, but I didn't fit in with the girls either. When locker room doors slammed shut, I'd stand outside, pretending I forgot something in my backpack. The teachers called it shyness. I called it survival. When I was 13, I started wearing oversized hoodies to hide my body, hoping to become invisible. I remember standing in front of the mirror, tracing the outlines of who I was, wondering which part of me needed to disappear for the world to finally accept me. I learned early that people only love what they can define. High school was a battlefield of unspoken rules and whispered cruelties. There was one teacher, Mrs. Parker, who seemed to notice my silence. She once told me, "Alex, you don't have to shrink to be safe." I wanted to believe her, but I had already built my armor. By then, I had stopped asking questions about my own identity. It was easier to become the shadow in the back of the classroom, the one who turned invisible when the world became too loud. When I turned 18, I left home with nothing but a suitcase and a scholarship letter. The city felt like an escape route. I thought people would be freer, kinder, but freedom doesn't erase the past. It only makes the silence louder. College gave me distance, but not peace. My first roommate once asked me, half-jokingly, "So, are you a boy or a girl?" I laughed it off, pretending the question didn't cut through me like glass. It was easier to pretend than to explain something I barely understood myself. Still, there were moments of light. In my second year, I joined a writing club. For the first time, I poured everything I couldn't say onto paper. The confusion, the shame, the small flickers of hope. My stories weren't about me directly, but anyone who read them carefully could see through the veil. I met people who said they understood what it felt like to be different. But even with them, I carried a fear I couldn't shake. If they knew everything, would they still see me as human? There was one person back then, Jamie. They were gentle and bright, with eyes that seemed to notice every detail others missed. We grew close, and for a while, I thought I'd found someone who could truly see me. I told them the truth one evening under a streetlight, my hands trembling as I spoke. Jamie didn't say anything for a long time. When they finally did, it wasn't cruelty that hurt. It was pity. "That must be hard for you," they said softly, before finding excuses not to meet again. After that, I stopped telling anyone. Years passed in fragments. I graduated, moved from job to job, always keeping to myself. People said I was quiet, polite, dependable, the kind of person who never makes waves. They didn't see the storm beneath the surface. Every day felt like I was performing a version of myself that the world could tolerate. Nights were my refuge. I wrote then, mostly poetry, small, broken truths hidden in metaphors. When the pandemic hit, isolation became normal. For the first time, my loneliness didn't feel unusual. But when the world opened up again, I didn't know how to return to it. The noise, the questions, the expectations, it all felt too heavy. That's when I moved here, into this apartment complex full of strangers who nod politely in elevators but never ask for names. I liked it that way. I told myself I preferred solitude, that it was safer not to hope. But that wasn't true. Some nights I would hear footsteps in the hallway, slow, steady, the security guard making his rounds. I didn't know his name then, but his presence was oddly comforting. It was proof that someone was still awake, still watching, in a world that had long forgotten I existed. The night he knocked on my door, something shifted. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, not with curiosity, but with genuine concern. Maybe it was the warmth in his voice when he asked if I was all right. No one had asked me that in years. His kindness felt dangerous, like sunlight on skin that had only known the dark. That night, after he left, I stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I thought about the years I had spent hiding, how fear had disguised itself as protection. I realized I didn't even know what it felt like to be known, truly known, without apology. The truth was, I had been living half a life. The other half waited quietly behind the locked doors of my own heart. Ethan's knock wasn't just a sound in the middle of the night. It was a question I wasn't ready to answer. Why was I still hiding when no one was chasing me anymore? Why did I still flinch at the thought of being seen? As dawn crept across the sky, spilling pale light over the cracked window pane, I whispered to myself, "Maybe it's time." The words startled me. They didn't sound like mine, yet they came from somewhere deep inside, from a place that had waited years to be heard. I poured another cup of tea, watching the steam rise and fade into nothing. The city outside began to stir, people waking, cars starting, doors opening. I sat there, still and quiet, feeling something unfamiliar in my chest. Hope. Fragile, trembling hope. And though I tried to ignore it, I couldn't help but listen for footsteps in the hallway again, wondering if that same knock would return, not to fix the lights this time, but to remind me that maybe I don't have to face the darkness alone. After that night, I expected everything to go back to how it was. That's how it always went. People would show up for a moment, then disappear, leaving me to tuck their memory away in some quiet corner of my mind. But Ethan, he didn't disappear. He came back. It was 2 nights later. I was on the couch reading when I heard a soft knock. It was different from before, lighter, almost playful. I opened the door, and there he was, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee from the vending machine. "A peace offering," he said with a small grin. "In case I scared you the other night." I wanted to tell him he hadn't scared me, that it was his kindness that unsettled me more than anything. But I just smiled and took the cup. "You didn't have to," I murmured. "Didn't want to drink alone," he replied. "Figured I'd share my misery." He leaned against the doorframe, so casual, but his eyes were searching, trying to see if I'd close the door or let him in again. I stepped aside. He walked in without a word, and it felt surprisingly natural, like this was already our routine. That night we talked for hours. Just ordinary things. The broken elevator, a weird smell in the hall, how time seems to stretch forever during a night shift. He made quiet jokes, and for the first time in months, I actually laughed. It was a hesitant sound, but it was real. As the clock crept past 1, he stood up to leave. "I'll check the hallway lights tomorrow," he said, almost as if he was finding an excuse to come back. And he did. He came back again, and again. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes with just a soft smile and a story from his patrols. One night, he found a stray cat in the parking lot and asked if I wanted to adopt it. Another time, he left a small flashlight by my door. Just in case. They weren't grand gestures. It was the quiet, steady consistency that started to fill the emptiness I had mistaken for peace. His presence became a part of my nights. Around midnight, I'd find myself listening for his footsteps. The nights he didn't come were the longest, reminding me just how fragile this new connection felt. Slowly, I started to learn little things about him. He was 35, an army vet, with a gentle sadness he carried from his past. He mentioned a daughter, Emily, who sent him crayon drawings every month. He showed me one, a wrinkled piece of paper with hearts and a stick figure labeled Daddy. The edges were worn, like he'd folded and unfolded it 1,000 times. "You must miss her," I said softly. "Every day," he replied, "but I guess she's the reason I keep trying to be better." His honesty was disarming. He didn't hide his regrets. He just let them exist, and in doing so, he gave me permission to stop pretending I had none. One rainy evening he asked, "What about you, Alex? You always listen, but you never talk about yourself." My first instinct was to deflect, to hide in vagueness like I always did, but his eyes were so patient, so kind. I took a deep breath. "There's not much to tell," I started. "Just a complicated life." He smiled faintly. "Complicated doesn't scare me." And just like that, something inside me cracked open. The words tumbled out, fragile and trembling. I told him everything. About my childhood, the labels, the loneliness. I told him I was born intersex, that I'd spent my life trying not to exist too loudly. When I finished, I couldn't look at him. The silence was deafening. I waited for that familiar shift, the awkward withdrawal that always came after this confession. But it never came. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was calm. That must have been heavy to carry alone. I looked up, stunned. "You're not uncomfortable?" He just shook his head. "Why would I be? You're still you. I don't see anything strange about that." The simplicity of it, it just undid me. For years I'd been trying to explain myself, to make my existence easy for others to accept. And here he was, not even trying to understand, just accepting. That level of acceptance was terrifying. It left me with nowhere to hide. From that night on, things changed. I started opening up more, not just about my past, but about my fears, about feeling like a ghost in my own life. He just listened. He never tried to fix me. He just sat with me, and the warmth between us grew. Unspoken, cautious, but real. It wasn't some dramatic movie romance. It was quieter, slower, like the steady flicker of a candle that just wouldn't go out. One night, he noticed my bookshelf. "You read a lot of poetry," he said. "Which one's your favorite?" I handed him a worn copy of Mary Oliver. He flipped through it and read a line aloud softly. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" He looked up at me, his voice a whisper. "You ever think about that?" "All the time," I admitted. "But I never have an answer." He nodded. "Maybe you don't need one yet." The way he said it, It stayed with me. Maybe it was okay not to have all the answers. As weeks went by, the space between us grew smaller. A shared joke, a lingering look, the brush of his hand. And a dangerous question started forming in my mind. What happens when kindness starts to feel like love? I tried to shut it down. People like me didn't get love stories. We got lessons in letting go. But every time Ethan knocked on my door, every time he smiled at me like I wasn't something broken, that old belief started to crack. Then, one night, he didn't come. The hallway was silent, and my chest felt hollow. I stayed up until 2, just staring at the door, wondering if I'd imagined it all. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a single, faint knock. I opened the door. He looked tired, but his eyes were soft. "Didn't want you thinking I forgot," he said simply. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let him in. As we sat there in the quiet, I realized something had changed for good. The story of my life wasn't just mine anymore. He was a part of it, steady, real, and terrifyingly human. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. I was afraid of losing it. The first sign that something had changed came quietly, like the chill that creeps in before a storm. It started with glances, those fleeting, measuring looks from neighbors in the hallway, the kind that linger just long enough to leave a bruise. At first, I thought I was imagining it. After all, I'd spent years overanalyzing every expression, every tone. But then came the whispers, low and sharp, cutting through the air like tiny blades. I didn't know who started it. Maybe someone saw Ethan leaving my apartment late one night, or maybe the building's gossip chain simply needed new fuel. Either way, the story took shape quickly. The lonely tenant on the 4th floor and the night guard who spent too much time at their door. It didn't take long for that curiosity to twist into judgment. People always need a reason to explain what they don't understand. When Ethan came by that evening, I could see something was wrong before he even spoke. His uniform looked more wrinkled than usual, his eyes tired. He leaned against the doorframe, running a hand through his hair as if trying to erase the day. "They called me into the office," he said finally. "For what?" He hesitated. "Someone complained, said I was spending too much time here, said it looked unprofessional." I felt my stomach tighten. "You're joking." "I wish I was." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "My supervisor told me to keep things strictly business. Said people talk." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The hum of the hallway light filled the silence between us. I didn't know whether to feel angry or ashamed. The thought that our quiet companionship, something so innocent, so necessary, had become a spectacle made my throat ache. "I don't want you to get in trouble," I said at last. Maybe it's better if we don't." He cut me off, his tone firm but gentle. "Don't finish that sentence." "But Ethan," he shook his head. "I'm not going to pretend this connection doesn't matter just because some people can mind their own business." The conviction in his voice should have comforted me, but it didn't. It only deepened the fear already growing in my chest. I had lived my whole life trying to avoid attention, trying to slip through the cracks unnoticed. Now suddenly I was being seen, and not in the way I had hoped. Days passed, and the air in the building grew heavier. Conversation stopped when I entered the lobby. The woman from apartment 3A, who used to smile politely, now avoided eye contact. One night, someone slipped a note under my door. It wasn't cruel, not exactly. It just said, "People are talking. You should be careful." But the words carried a quiet venom that stayed with me long after I threw the note away. Ethan tried to act like it didn't bother him. He'd still knock on my door, still bring coffee, still talk like nothing had changed. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flicked toward the hallway every time we spoke. The world outside our small bubble had started pressing in. One night, he arrived without his usual smile. His jaw was tight, his hands restless. "They're moving me to another shift," he said quietly. "Daytime patrols." I felt the air leave my lungs. Because of me? He didn't answer right away, but the silence told me everything. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "Don't be." His voice was soft but strained. "It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." I wanted to believe that, but I knew how the world worked. For people like me, existing was often enough to be considered wrong. That night when he left, he didn't promise to come back. He just said, "Take care of yourself, okay?" The door clicked shut, and for the first time since he'd entered my life, the silence didn't feel comforting. It felt hollow. Days turned into a blur. I stopped writing. The coffee grew cold on my table, untouched. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, my heart jumped, hoping it was him, even though I knew it wouldn't be. The flickering lamp in the corner, once a small annoyance, became unbearable. It reminded me of that first night. The knock, the tea, the warmth I didn't know how to live without anymore. Then, almost 2 weeks later, there was another knock. I didn't move at first. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, some cruel trick of longing. But the knock came again, gentle, steady, familiar. When I opened the door, Ethan stood there, no uniform this time, just a worn jacket and tired eyes. "Thought you had the day shift now," I said, trying to sound calm. "I do," he replied. "But I couldn't sleep. I needed to see you." I stepped aside, letting him in. The air between us felt different, heavier, filled with everything we hadn't said. "I hate that this happened," he began. "I hate that people can't let things be." I swallowed hard. This is why I stay away from people. They always find a way to turn kindness into suspicion. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. The world's not kind to what it doesn't understand." We sat in silence for a long time. The rain outside had returned, steady and cold, a familiar soundtrack to our shared solitude. He reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. "I don't care what they think," he said softly. "I care about you." The words landed with a weight I wasn't ready for. I wanted to tell him not to say it, not to risk anything for me. But the truth was, I needed to hear it. I had spent so long believing I was unlovable that even a whisper of care felt like sunlight after years of winter. When he stood to leave, I felt a panic rise inside me, sharp and desperate. "Will I see you again?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded once. "You will." But I didn't know whether he meant tomorrow, or someday, or never. After he left, I sat for hours by the door, the faint scent of rain and coffee still lingering in the air. I thought about how fragile everything had become, how a few words from strangers could unravel the small world we had built. Yet beneath the fear, there was something else, something stubborn and alive. It wasn't just love, though maybe it was the beginning of it. It was the simple realization that someone had seen me, truly seen me, and didn't look away. That mattered more than the whispers, more than the rumors, more than the loneliness I'd carried all my life. Outside, the rain began to fade. The hallway was quiet again, but not empty. His presence lingered like a promise, one I couldn't quite name but refused to let go of. I turned off the flickering lamp and sat in the soft glow of dawn, whispering into the stillness. He came back, and somehow that was enough to keep me waiting, for the next knock, for the next moment of light in the long dark. It had been 3 months since the night Ethan last came to my door. 3 long months filled with silence, routine, and the heavy ache of missing something I couldn't even name aloud. The building had grown colder in more ways than one. People still looked at me differently, some with pity, some with quiet disdain, but I had learned to stop meeting their eyes. I had gone back to my quiet life, pretending the world hadn't tilted the night he'd walked away. But sometimes, in the middle of those long, sleepless nights, I'd still imagine the sound of his knock. Steady, soft, and sure. The memory of it had become a heartbeat I just couldn't silence. That evening, the rain returned. It came down hard, slanting against the windows like the sky itself was mourning. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small light of my phone. The last message I'd sent to Ethan months ago still sat there, unread. "Hope you're okay." I had never sent another one. Some silences just feel too sacred to break. Then, a little before midnight, I heard it again. 3 soft knocks. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. My breath caught in my throat as the sound echoed again. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling as I approached the door. When I opened it, the hallway light spilled over a familiar face, wet from the rain, eyes tired, but smiling faintly. "Hey," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't speak. Just the sight of him unraveled months of restraint. I stepped aside, and he entered, his jacket soaked through. Without thinking, I reached for a towel, handing it to him like I used to. The silence between us was thick, but not empty. It was full of everything we'd left unsaid. "I shouldn't be here," he said finally, rubbing the back of his neck. But I couldn't stay away anymore. My heart ached at his honesty. "What happened?" He sighed, setting the towel aside. "They let me go. Said I violated company policy. Got too close to a tenant. Guess the rumors finally did their job." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. It was bound to happen. I just wish I'd been brave enough to make it happen on my terms." He sat down, his hands clasped together, staring at the floor. "The thing is," he continued, "these past few months, I kept trying to forget you. I picked up odd jobs, tried different shifts, kept myself busy. But no matter what I did, I'd end up here in my mind, at your door, wondering if you were okay." Something inside me cracked open then, a mix of grief, gratitude, and something deeper, rawer. "I thought you'd moved on," I said quietly. "You had a life before me, a normal one." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "You are my life now. Maybe not in the way people would understand, but in the way that matters." The rain outside softened to a whisper, as if giving space for the silence that followed. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't look away. For the first time in years, I let myself be seen, completely, without walls, without fear. "I spent so much of my life hiding," I whispered. "From everyone. From myself. I thought if I stayed small, quiet, invisible, I'd be safe. But then you knocked on my door that night, and suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore." He reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, careful, but it sent warmth flooding right through me. "You don't have to hide anymore," he said softly. "Not from me." For a long moment, we just sat there. Two people shaped by the world's cruelty, finding something gentle in the ruins. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. The building was quiet, the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm. He stayed the night, not in the way the rumors had once imagined, but in the way two broken souls share space, without pretense, without expectation. We talked until dawn, about everything and nothing, about childhood memories, about fear, about what it meant to exist in a world that refused to understand you. When morning came, the light through the window was soft and gold, painting the room in forgiveness. Ethan turned to me, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what happens next," he said, "but I want to build something real, maybe small, maybe quiet, but real." For the first time, I didn't flinch at the thought of the future. I smiled, a small, trembling smile, but it was real. "Then let's start with breakfast," I said. He laughed, that familiar, gentle laugh that had first disarmed me months ago. It sounded like hope. As he helped me make coffee, I realized something simple, yet profound. Love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes quietly at midnight, with a knock on the door and a promise to stay. When he left later that morning, he didn't say goodbye. He just said, "See you soon." And this time, I knew he meant it. In the days that followed, the whispers faded. The stares softened. Maybe people had found something else to talk about, or maybe they'd just grown tired of their own cruelty. It didn't matter. What mattered was the peace that had settled inside me, the kind that comes from no longer needing to prove your worth to the world. I started writing again, not just about pain, but about healing, about the way a single act of kindness, a knock on a lonely door, can change everything. Ethan would visit often, bringing coffee, laughter, and that steady warmth that made the world feel a little less cruel. Sometimes, when the nights grow long and the rain begins to fall, I'll sit by the window, waiting, not in fear or longing, but in quiet gratitude. Because I know now that love, in its truest form, isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about someone choosing to stay, even when the world tells them not to. And as I share this with you, I can still hear that knock echoing softly in my memory. A sound that once startled me, but now reminds me of everything I thought I'd lost and found again. The knock that changed everything. The night that began it all. The love that made me whole. And somehow, I know this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a new kind of light. Thank you so much for listening. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. I'll see you soon.